Hi, my name is Ayo Dubo, and I'm a youth advocate here at Mikva Challenge.
And my name is Paul Vallas, and I'm a candidate for the mayor of the city of Chicago.
Okay, before we get started, I want to ask you an icebreaker question, just to get to know each other.
Okay.
So, can you explain your most embarrassing story in just 3 words?
The most embarrassing story, oh my goodness gracious. In 3 words, there's so many embarrassing stories.
Yeah, I can go first if you like.
You go first.
Okay, mine is football, pool, toss.
Football, pool, toss.
Yeah.
It's a football story. Football, girlfriend, clean.
Okay, well, the first question is the easy one. What made you want to run for mayor of the city of Chicago?
Well, what made me want to run for mayor of the city of Chicago is I think the city has serious problems because we're really living in 2 cities. We're living in a small, affluent, thriving, prosperous city. It's really a 3-mile area emanating from downtown. It revolves around the downtown area. And that is a city that has seen development. That is a city that has seen investment. That's a city that has seen significant population growth and expanded employment opportunities. And then we have the rest of the city, and really the rest of the city is about 85% of the city. And that's a city that's seen little to no investment, and many areas of that city have been in a severe depression state for 3 or 4 generations. The Roseland-Pullman area where I grew up is a commercial desert, is a food desert, is in many ways a transportation desert. It's a retail desert. There's so little economic activity, and in fact, in some areas of the community, as many as 50 to 60% of the men are in some phase of the criminal justice system. So I'm running for mayor to change that. I'm running for mayor to take the immense resources that are available at the city's disposal, and you have to realize the city controls $20 billion in revenues a year. And what I want to do is I want to design budgets, select and implement programs, and allocate resources in a way that will stimulate investment and economic opportunities in the 80% of the city that has been long neglected. So that's my primary mission. And when I talk about investment, what am I talking about? I'm talking about investment to make sure that every community has the public safety resources they need, so all communities are safe and secure. To make sure that we have quality schools in all of our communities. So if you don't get into a select enrollment magnet school, you're not disappointed because your neighborhood has quality schools, like an IB program. I want to make sure that we get let out of the water. I want to make sure that we have access to public transportation. There are some areas on the south side that are transportation deserts. And finally, I want to make sure that living in Chicago is affordable, that we have affordable housing, and that we're not punishing families, working families, and the poor with these regressive taxes and fees and fines. Now that's a lot, but at the end of the day, that's what's driving me.
Okay. So our next couple of questions are gathered from youth all over communities in the city of Chicago. Our first question is from Shanera from Inglewood, Washington Park, and she asks, where do you see the school systems in 20 years?
Well, obviously, if I'm mayor, I envision a school system that really begins in the prenatal phase. 70% of the brain development occurs between the ages of 0 to 3, and children who are born whose mothers have not had prenatal care are sometimes 3, 4, 5 times more likely to have long-term health issues, or for that matter, have our students that are in need of special needs, etc. They have problems along the way. So I see a school system where the education begins in the prenatal phase. That means no baby is born without prenatal care. that single mothers, first-time mothers have the coaching and the support that they need so that during those critical 0 to 3 years, their children are in early childhood daycare and are receiving the type of stimulus, early literacy, early numeracy, or early vocabulary. I also envision a school system where all the schools are community schools. That means they're not only offering quality academic programs, but they are centers of social service support. So 3 meals a day, longer school day, longer school year, activities into the evening. In many communities, schools can be safe havens. When I ran the school system, all of our schools were open till 6 o'clock every night. Children could stay till 6 o'clock. They could get a third meal a day. If they needed health care, they could get health care services there. If their families needed to be connected with social service agencies, they could come to the school, to the parent and community center, and access those services. You see what I mean? So that's what I envision. And finally, I see a school district, a school system where each of the high schools, each of the neighborhood high schools has like a signature magnet program, like the International Baccalaureate program, and that each of the high schools will allow their juniors and seniors who are progressing at an accelerated pace to take courses for college courses for dual credit, or to be enrolled in college early. And I want every one of our high schools to offer what I call career and technical education and work study electives, like the Crystal Ray School. At the Crystal Ray School, which is a school founded by the Jesuits, the students are in school till about 1 to 2 o'clock, and then they're in work study. They're in paid work study. So there's no reason why we can't offer occupational training and work study to our juniors and seniors in lieu of your traditional electives. So that's what I envision. I envision an education system that gets at, that provides the interventions and supports at an earliest age, has, offers schools that are community centers, and then offer high schools that can not only give students a jump on college with early college dual enrollment, but can also provide work study opportunities so young people can enter the workforce and can enter that work environment and can begin earning some money at an early age so they can become acclimated to the new economy.
Okay.
Is my time up?
No. Okay, going with communities. Our next question is from Lorne from Albany Park. As she said, how would you help my community while helping all other communities as well?
Well, my plan for Chicago, there are enormous resources available that we could be distributing, that we could be using in the 80% of the city that is struggling. And like communities where I grew up, like the Rosen-Pullman community. And let me give you an example of just what 4 of those resources are. First of all, there's this federal program called the Opportunity Zone Program. And it was in the 2017 tax bill. And these are massive tax incentives for investors who will invest in poor areas. They allow businesses to shelter their capital gains, their income from the tax man. And if you invest in struggling areas, you realize a return, it's tax-free. So they're massive incentives. And there are 133 opportunity zones identified in Chicago, and most of them are in the poor communities on the west side and south side, number one. Number two, I want to take a third of all the tax increment financing revenues. These are tax revenues that are diverted for economic development, but most of that money is being used in affluent areas that really don't need incentives for developers to locate. So in some ways, they're just giving the money away. And I want to take a third of that money over the next 5 years, which is $1 billion, and I want to invest that in the west side and the south sides, along with the opportunity zone investments. And if we're able to do that, if we're able to generate $1 billion in equity investment from the TIFs and $1 billion in equity investment from private developers or from private investors, you could generate $10 billion capital investment to help these communities. The third thing that I want to do is I want to take the city's $20 billion that they spend every year, the $1 billion in contracts, the hiring, the billions of dollars in purchases that they make, and I want to prioritize contracting out with Chicago businesses, purchasing from Chicago businesses. I want to prioritize hiring Chicagoans, giving Chicagoans the economic opportunities. And I want to give a weighting to those companies that will locate in the poorer communities or companies in the poorer communities that are seeking city contracts. And I want to prioritize or give points or give weighting to contractors who are willing, when it comes to deciding whether or not they're going to get the contracts, to contractors that are willing to hire people from the poorest communities. So if you were able to do that, if you were able to use the $20 billion budgets that the city controls as an investment tool between the opportunity zones and the use of the TIF monies, targeting TIF monies to the poorest areas, and using the $20 billion in budgets that the city controls. That's the city, the CHA, the CTA, the schools, the park district, the enterprise funds, the airports. If you were able to use these resources, you could begin to really stimulate development and growth in the poorest areas of the city. And if those areas start growing, the economy is going to expand. If the economy expands, the tax base expands. If the tax base expands, the city won't have to raise taxes to generate new revenue. The city will be getting more money because the economy is expanding. So that's my strategy.
Okay. So the most important thing to you is development in lower end communities.
Well, it is important. You know, are you familiar with, of course you're familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
Yeah.
And the speech that he gave at the Lincoln Memorial. Well, you know, a lot of times people look at the highlights of that speech that are often quoted, actually detract from the main essence of the speech.
Yeah.
And what that speech was about was Dr. King was talking about economic opportunity. When he talked about the Constitution being and the Declaration of Independence being a promissory note, that promissory note was economic opportunity. Mm-hmm. That speech, that march was about jobs. It was about economic investment. It was about creating economic opportunities in poor communities. It was about providing economic opportunities for African Americans, you see? Because Dr. King felt that without economic opportunity, you can't have real equity. You can't have social justice, you see? So I believe that if we for once in our lives really prioritize using the incentives and the resources at our disposal to invest in those communities that have been long neglected, we will not only address the underlying causes of crime and violence in our community, but will create a dynamic which will produce the type of prosperity that will allow the city to grow. Our city is shrinking, unlike New York and other cities. We, among the big cities, have lost more people than any of the largest cities in the United States, and we have lost 17% of our wealth as measured in residential property value. And it's not because the downtown isn't growing or the north side isn't growing. It's because the poorest communities are in a crisis, and in some cases, they're in a state of economic decay. So there's no substitute for investing in these communities and creating economic opportunities because everything else emanates from that.
So our next question is, the most pressing issue to youth is all about gun safety. So Gillette from Uptown asks, how would you go about regulating gun laws and who's eligible to own a gun?
Well, let me just say three things. You know, I've always been a strong proponent of tough gun legislation. And from background checks to waiting periods to cracking down on gun dealers, etc. That's a struggle. But there's a limit to what we can do to keep guns out of the city, because at the end of the day, as long as the state and the federal government are not serious about gun control and are not enacting rigorous gun laws, gun safety laws, we're going to be at a disadvantage because people can just bring guns across the border. So while I support a continued push to toughen gun laws and gun regulations, etc., at the end of the day, we've got to do more than just that. I support very close cooperation with other governmental agencies, both at the federal and state level, as well as with our neighbors in Indiana, because there needs to be a coordinated law enforcement effort to crack down on the illegal purchasing, the illegal selling of guns. It's got to be a collective effort. We have to be working with the suburbs. We can't operate in a vacuum. We have to be working with our suburban mayors. We're not an island, so to speak. So the first thing is we need tougher gun control laws that will have a limited effect. Secondly, we need to be coordinating with other governmental agencies. And the third thing is, while I have always been a strong advocate for alternative sentencing for nonviolent offenders, in fact, I did work for the U.S. Attorney General, Sally Yates, on those very issues, on how to address the issue of adult education and occupational training in the prisons so people could leave the prisons and they could find jobs and find economic opportunities. Well, I've been a strong proponent for decades for alternative sentencing for nonviolent offenders. I feel when it comes to individuals, using guns illegally, individuals who buying guns illegally, individuals selling guns illegally, individuals committing crimes with guns, we've got to be aggressive. Yeah. We've got to be aggressive about charging people. We've got to be aggressive about sentencing people. And this is where we need the cooperation from the federal government, because the federal government is very aggressive. Federal laws are much tougher on gun violators. We need that as a deterrent.
Okay, so our last question is for people who are under 18 and can't vote yet. How will you and your office listen to them and their needs in order to represent them as well?
Well, believe it or not, I have a short answer to this. In all the school districts I've had, I've always required, not promoted, but required local school councils. And I have always allowed those local school councils to select members of what I would call the citywide local school council. So we would treat the individual local school councils, the local school student councils, student governments, along with the citywide student government council, like we would treat our board. We would provide them with access to information. We would let them come in and testify at the board meetings, etc. The whole idea was to empower the students by helping them get organized. And the student governing councils at the local level also led our voter registration drive, because we had a program that basically said, when you get your diploma, if you're 18, you need to show your voter registration card. And one final thing, there needs to be student representatives on all the local governing councils, because if you have those student representatives, they'll be able to stay involved and provide input in the governance of the local schools.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your time.
No, it's my pleasure. I'm still trying to figure out what your 3 things were about that story. You're going to have to tell me off camera, okay?
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.